Picture Atlanta International Airport buzzing on a Friday night. Isaiah Grant, a 72-year-old black retired Air Force colonel, boards a first-class flight to Chicago. Mid-air, Tara Hensley, a white flight attendant, storms over, accuses him of stealing his seat and slaps him hard. The cabin freezes, a glass shatters, passengers gasp. Tara smirks, thinking he's a nobody, clueless that his wife, Naomi, owns Sky High Airlines. Isaiah doesn't blink, just whispers, "You just ended yourself." What's her next move? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more epic showdowns. The slap still stung Isaiah Grant's cheek 30 minutes into the flight, but he sat tall in his first-class seat, his silver hair catching the dim cabin light, his sharp hazel eyes fixed on the window. The hum of the engines vibrated through the plush leather beneath him, a steady pulse against the chaos brewing in the aisle. His navy blazer, crisp despite the journey, bore a small Air Force pin on the lapel, a quiet testament to decades of service. Around him, the cabin buzzed with whispers, passengers stealing glances, some shocked, others smug. Tara Hensley, the flight attendant who'd struck him, hadn't retreated. She stood a few rows back, her blonde ponytail pulled tight, her uniform pristine, her blue eyes narrowed with a fury she couldn't mask. She'd humiliated him in front of everyone, and yet here he was, unshaken, a rock in a storm she'd started. That only made her angrier. Tara marched forward, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. She stopped beside Isaiah's seat, looming over him, her shadow cutting across his tray table. "I need to see your ticket again," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "Now." Isaiah turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze with a calm that unnerved her. Without a word, he reached into his blazer's inner pocket, pulled out the boarding pass and held it out. His hand was steady, calloused from years of gripping controls in cockpits far rougher than this cushy jet. Tara snatched it, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the details. Seat 2B, first class. His name in bold, Isaiah Grant. It was real, undeniable, and yet her jaw tightened. She didn't hand it back. Instead, she gripped it with both hands and tore it in half, the rip echoing like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. "This is fake," she declared, tossing the pieces onto his lap. "You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the rows. A woman in a red scarf clutched her purse tighter, her eyes wide. A teenage girl in headphones pulled one earbud out, staring. Across the aisle, Victor Klein, a white businessman in a tailored gray suit, leaned back in his seat, his dark hair slicked with gel, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Should have stayed in, coach," he muttered, loud enough for Isaiah to hear. Victor's gold watch glinted as he adjusted his cufflinks, his voice dripping with condescension. Isaiah didn't flinch. He brushed the torn ticket off his lap, letting the pieces flutter to the floor, his expression unreadable. He'd faced worse than this, far worse, in jungles and deserts where the stakes weren't just a seat but survival. This was a petty battle, but one he wouldn't lose. Tara's chest heaved, her face flushing red. She couldn't stand his silence, his refusal to cower. She'd expected him to argue, to grovel, to prove her right by crumbling. Instead, he sat there, a 72-year-old black man in a space she'd decided he didn't deserve, and that defiance fueled her. "You think you can just sit there?" she hissed, leaning closer, her breath hot with rage. "I know your type, sneaking into places you don't belong. I've seen it 100 times." Her words weren't just an accusation. They were a verdict, steeped in a venom that went beyond this flight, beyond this moment. They carried the weight of every assumption she'd ever made about men who looked like him, every stereotype she'd swallowed whole and spat back out. Isaiah's fingers tightened on the armrest, the only sign of tension beneath his calm exterior. He'd heard those words before, in mess halls, on bases, in towns where his uniform meant nothing to those who saw only his skin. He could have told her he'd flown F-16s over hostile skies, that he'd earned this seat 1,000 times over, but he knew she wouldn't hear it. She'd already judged him, and facts wouldn't change that. "Check the manifest," he said, finally. his voice low, steady, a deep rumble that cut through her tirade. Tara froze for a split second, caught off guard by his composure. Then her lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I will!" she shot back, spinning on her heel and storming toward the galley, her ponytail bouncing with each furious step. The cabin watched her go, a mix of unease and curiosity settling over the passengers. A few rows back, a young black man named Jamal, barely 20, adjusted his baseball cap and pulled out his phone, his brown eyes flicking between Isaiah and Tara's retreating figure. He'd seen the slap, heard the rip, felt the sting of her words in his own chest. His thumb hovered over the record button, a quiet resolve hardening his features. This wasn't right, and he wasn't about to let it slide unnoticed. Tara reached the galley, her hands shaking as she grabbed the in-flight phone and punched in the code for the cockpit. "Captain, we've got a problem in first class," she said, her voice tight but firm. "Passenger in 2B. I think he's using a fake ticket. We need security." On the other end, Captain Ellis, a gruff man with 30 years in the air, sighed audibly. "You sure about this, Hensley?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Positive," she replied, her conviction unwavering. "He's disruptive. I want him off my plane." Ellis paused, then muttered, "Fine. I'll call it in. Emergency protocol. Security'll meet us mid-flight." Tara hung up, a flicker of triumph crossing her face. She'd won. She'd show him. Back in the cabin, Isaiah adjusted his blazer, the military pin catching the light again. He could feel the eyes on him, the judgment, the doubt. Victor Klein chuckled, leaning toward the woman next to him, a middle-aged blonde in pearls. "Some people just don't know when to quit," he said, his voice oily with amusement. The woman nodded faintly, her lips pursed, unwilling to disagree. Isaiah ignored them. He'd dealt with men like Victor before, cowards who hid behind smirks and privilege. This was nothing new, just louder, uglier, more public. Minutes ticked by, the plane slicing through the night sky at 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin settled into a tense hum. Then the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're enacting a security protocol. Please remain seated." A murmur swept through the rows, heads turning, eyes darting. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. Tara reappeared, her arms crossed, a smug glint in her eyes as she lingered, near the galley, watching his row like a hawk. The cabin door hissed open, an unusual sound mid-flight, and 2 security officers stepped in, their boots heavy on the carpet. They were broad-shouldered, faces stern, badges gleaming under the overhead lights. The taller one, a white man with a buzz cut, scanned the cabin, his hand resting on his radio. "Isaiah Grant?" he called, his voice clipped. Isaiah raised a hand slightly, acknowledging them without standing. "That's me." The officer nodded, stepping closer. "We need you to come with us, sir. Now." Tara pointed, her finger jabbing the air. "That's him. He's the one. Fake ticket. Disruptive." Isaiah stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with a quiet dignity that belied his age. He towered over Tara, though he made no move to intimidate. The officers flanked him, one grabbing his arm, the other pulling out cuffs. "Hands behind your back," the second officer, a shorter man with a scar on his cheek, ordered. Isaiah complied, his wrists locking together with a cold click. The cuffs bit into his skin, a sensation he hadn't felt since a training exercise decades ago. Passengers gawked, some whispering, others craning their necks. Victor clapped slowly, a mocking rhythm that grated on the silence. "About time," he said, grinning. Tara's smirk widened as the officers led Isaiah toward the galley, her victory sealed. She'd turned a slap into a full takedown, and the cabin was her witness. She didn't care that he'd shown a ticket, didn't care that he'd stayed calm. She decided he didn't belong, and now he was gone. As the officers shoved him into the narrow holding area, she leaned against the wall, arms folded, savoring the moment. "Should have listened," she muttered under her breath, her voice dripping with spite. But in the shadows of row 12, Jamal hit stop on his phone, the red recording light blinking off. He'd caught it all. The slap, the torn ticket, the cuffs, Tara's venom. His hands shook slightly as he uploaded the clip to X, his caption simple. "This is wrong." He whispered to himself, "This is going viral." The video spun into the digital ether, a spark Tara couldn't see, one that would burn hotter than she'd ever imagined. Isaiah sat in the galley, cuffed and silent, his mind racing. He'd thought staying composed would end this, but Tara had lit a fuse, and the explosion was just beginning. Isaiah Grant sat in the cramped galley holding area, the cold metal cuffs digging into his wrists, the hum of the plane's engines a dull roar in his ears. His navy blazer hung slightly askew, the Air Force pin still glinting defiantly under the harsh fluorescent light. The two security officers stood nearby, their faces a mix of boredom and unease. Tara Hensley had retreated to the cabin, her smugness lingering like a bad smell, but Isaiah kept his hazel eyes steady, his breathing even. He'd been through interrogations tougher than this, stared down enemies with guns, not just glares. This was a hiccup, he told himself, a petty power play he'd outlast. The taller officer, buzz-cut gleaming with sweat, checked his radio as it crackled to life. "Ground confirms passenger Isaiah Grant, seat 2B, first class. Tickets legit," a voice barked through static. The officer's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to his partner, the scarred one, who shrugged. "Guess we got bad intel," Scar muttered, pulling out a key. He stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs with a reluctant grunt. "Sorry about this, sir," he said, his tone flat, not meeting Isaiah's gaze. The cuffs clattered to the floor, and Isaiah rubbed his wrists, the red marks a quiet testament to Tara's spite. "Happens?" he replied, his deep voice calm, though a flicker of steel hid beneath it. He'd won this round, or so he thought. The officers escorted him back to the cabin, the aisle stretching out like a gauntlet. Passengers turned, some with pity, others with curiosity. Victor Klein, the slick businessman, rolled his eyes, muttering, "Waste of time," as Isaiah passed. The woman in the red scarf offered a timid smile, her hands fidgeting with her purse. Isaiah nodded back, reclaiming his seat with the same quiet dignity he'd carried onto the plane. His torn ticket lay scattered on the floor, a shredded symbol of Tara's failed gambit. The cabin buzzed, a few passengers clapping awkwardly, a hesitant applause for what they assumed was justice. Isaiah adjusted his blazer, smoothing the fabric, his chest swelling slightly. He'd faced her down, stayed cool, and come out on top. Maybe this flight could still be salvaged. But Tara wasn't done. She emerged from the galley, a tray of coffee in her hands, her blonde ponytail swinging like a pendulum. Her blue eyes locked onto Isaiah, a storm brewing behind her forced smile. She moved down the aisle, serving drinks with mechanical precision, her lips tight, her movements sharp. She reached Isaiah's row, setting a steaming cup on his tray table with a thud. "Coffee," she said, her voice clipped, her gaze daring him to react. He nodded, lifting the cup, the heat seeping through the thin paper. He took a sip, the bitter taste grounding him, a small victory in the normalcy of it. Tara turned away, her heels clicking, and for a moment the tension seemed to ease. Then it happened. As she stepped past, her elbow slipped, knocking the cup from his hand. Scalding coffee splashed across Isaiah's lap, soaking his trousers, burning his thighs. He jolted upright, a hiss escaping his lips, the pain sharp and immediate. Tara spun around, her hand flying to her mouth in mock surprise. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, her tone dripping with fake concern. But her eyes gleamed, a vicious spark that betrayed her. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "Know your place." The words hit harder than the burn, a dagger of hate wrapped in a lie. The cabin erupted. The teenage girl gasped, yanking out her other earbud. The woman in pearls clutched her necklace, horrified. Victor Klein chuckled, a low guttural sound, his smirk widening. "Clumsy old man," he said, loud enough for the row to hear. Isaiah gripped the armrests, his knuckles whitening, the heat searing his skin. His blazer was stained, his dignity singed, but he forced his breathing steady. He'd survived worse, flak tearing through his cockpit, flames licking at his wings. This was nothing, he told himself, nothing he couldn't endure. But the lie tasted bitterer than the coffee. Tara stepped back, her tray clattering as she retreated, her apology a performance for the crowd. "It was an accident, I swear," she called out, her hands raised, her face a mask of innocence. Some passengers nodded, buying it, their eyes sliding away from Isaiah's soaked lap. Others frowned, sensing the edge in her voice, the venom she couldn't quite hide. Jamal, the young man in the cap, narrowed his eyes, his phone still in hand. He'd stopped recording after the cuffs came off, but now his thumb hovered again, suspicion creeping in. Something wasn't right, and he felt it in his gut. Isaiah wiped at his trousers with a napkin, the fabric sticking to his skin, the burn throbbing. He could have called her out, demanded the captain, turned this into a scene. But he didn't. He sat back, his posture rigid, his face a wall of calm. He'd learned long ago that reacting gave people like Tara power, and he wouldn't hand her that, not yet. The applause from minutes ago felt hollow now, the victory snatched away by a scalding splash. He'd thought he'd won, thought he'd silenced her. But she'd struck back harder, turning a verbal jab into a physical assault. The cabin settled, the murmurs fading, but the air crackled with unease. Tara returned to the galley, her smirk hidden from the passengers, but burning bright in her mind. She'd lost the ticket fight, sure, but this was personal. She'd marked him, humiliated him again, and the coffee stain was her trophy. She leaned against the counter, sipping water, her pulse racing with triumph. He'd thought he could sit there, all high and mighty, but she'd shown him. She'd keep showing him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Isaiah stared out the window, the night sky a blur of blackened stars. His thighs ached, the skin raw beneath his soaked pants. But his mind was sharper than ever. Tara's whisper echoed in his head. "Know your place." It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about who she thought he was, what she assumed he could never be. He'd faced that before, commanders doubting his wings, townsfolk spitting at his uniform. He'd risen above it every time, built a life that defied their hate. But this was a fresh wound, and it stung deeper because it was public, raw, undeniable. The plane droned on, the altitude steady, the cabin lights dimming as passengers settled back into their routines. Isaiah's hands rested on the armrests, his fingers tracing the leather, his military pin a silent anchor. He'd thought he could ride this out, let her tire herself out, but she'd escalated, turned words into weapons, then into fire. He glanced at the galley where Tara's shadow moved behind the curtain. She wasn't stopping. He knew that now. This wasn't a hiccup anymore, it was a war, and she'd just drawn blood. "Hey folks, what do you think? Was Tara's coffee spill an accident, or did she mean to burn Isaiah where it hurts? Comment 1 if you think she's pure evil, 2 if you're still on the fence. If this kind of injustice gets your blood boiling, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next twist. Has someone ever tried to put you in your place like this? Drop your stories below. We're in this together. Now, here's the big question. Will Isaiah let this slide? Or is he about to turn the tables in a way Tara can't even imagine? The coffee stain on Isaiah Grant's trousers had dried into a stiff, dark patch by the time the plane neared Chicago. The burn on his thighs a dull ache beneath his calm exterior. His navy blazer hung over the armrest, the Air Force pin catching, flickers of light as the cabin dimmed for descent. The hum of the engine softened, a deceptive lull in the storm Tara Hensley had unleashed. Isaiah sat tall, his hazel eyes scanning the rows, his silver hair a quiet crown of resilience. He'd taken her slap, her scalding attack, and still held his ground. The passengers around him had settled, some dozing, others scrolling phones, the earlier chaos fading into a tense normalcy. He thought he'd weathered the worst. He was wrong. Tara lingered near the galley, her blonde ponytail taut, her uniform still crisp despite the hours aloft. Her blue eyes burned with a fury she couldn't quench, the sting of her failed ticket gambit and security's retreat gnawing at her. She'd humiliated Isaiah twice, once with her hand, once with the coffee, but it wasn't enough. His silence, his refusal to break mocked her. She needed more, something bigger, something that would bury him. As she stacked cups, her gaze darted to Victor Klein, the slick businessman in the gray suit, lounging across the aisle from Isaiah. Victor's smirk hadn't faded since the coffee spill. He'd relished every second of Isaiah's discomfort. Tara saw an ally in that sneer, a shared disdain she could wield. She slipped down the aisle, her tray abandoned, her steps deliberate. Victor looked up as she leaned close, his gold watch glinting as he adjusted his cufflinks. "You're still mad about that old guy, huh?" he murmured, his voice low, oily with amusement. Tara's lips twitched, a flicker of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He thinks he's won," she whispered, her breath hot with spite. "Security let him go, but I'm not done." Victor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's the play?" he asked, leaning in. Tara glanced at Isaiah, then back to Victor. "He's a thief," she said, her voice a venomous hiss. "I'll prove it." Victor chuckled, a sound that slithered through the air. "I like where this is going." Tara straightened, her mind racing as she moved back to the galley. She needed evidence, something concrete to twist the knife deeper. She rummaged through a lost and found bin, her fingers brushing over forgotten scarves and pens until they closed around a slim leather wallet, left behind by some careless passenger. It was worn, stuffed with a few crumpled bills and a faded ID. Perfect. She tucked it into her apron pocket, her pulse quickening. This wasn't just revenge, it was annihilation. She'd frame him, turn the cabin against him, make sure he never sat in first class again. She waited, timing it just right. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're 20 minutes from Chicago. Prepare for landing." The cabin stirred, passengers adjusting seats, stowing bags. Tara grabbed a flashlight, her excuse ready, and marched back to Isaiah's row. She stopped beside his seat, her voice loud enough to carry. "Routine safety check," she announced, flipping open the overhead bin above him. Isaiah glanced up, his expression unreadable, but a flicker of wariness crossed his face. He'd seen her game shift, felt the air thicken with her intent. Tara rummaged through his carry-on, a simple black duffel, her hands moving with theatrical flair. Passengers craned their necks, curious. The woman in the red scarf frowned, sensing something off. Jamal, the young man in the cap, shifted in his seat, his phone resting on his knee, ready. Then Tara gasped, loud and sharp, pulling the wallet from the bag like a magician revealing a trick. "What's this?" she cried, holding it high. "This isn't yours." She flipped it open, flashing the ID, a white man's face, not Isaiah's. "Thief!" she shouted, her voice piercing the cabin. The word hit like a bomb. Head snapped up, eyes widened. The teenage girl clutched her backpack, whispering, "No way." The woman in pearls gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Victor leapt to his feet, pointing at Isaiah. "I knew it. Caught red-handed," he bellowed, his smirk gone, replaced by a gleeful rage. Isaiah sat still, his hands resting on his lap, the coffee stain a stark contrast to his calm. "That's not mine," he said, his deep voice steady, cutting through the chaos. But Tara shook her head, her ponytail whipping. "Liar! You stole it. I saw you sneaking around earlier." It was a blatant lie, but the cabin didn't care. Doubt spread like wildfire. Passengers murmured, their voices rising. "Kick him off!" a man in a polo shirt yelled from the back. "He doesn't belong here!" a woman in a floral dress echoed. The accusations piled on, fueled by Tara's planted seed, tapping into a dark current Isaiah knew too well. He'd been called worse than thief. Words spat at him in uniform, in bars, on streets where his medals meant nothing. This was different, though. This was a setup, and it was working. His hazel eyes locked on Tara, reading her triumph. Her hate. She'd turned a slap into a crime, and the crowd was hers. Tara slammed the bin shut, clutching the wallet like evidence in a courtroom. "Captain needs to know," she said, storming to the galley phone. She dialed the cockpit, her voice trembling with fake urgency. "Captain Ellis, we've got a thief in first class, seat 2B. I found a stolen wallet in his bag. We need to land now. Ellis groaned audibly through the line. Hensley, you sure this time? He asked, exhaustion lacing his tone. Yes, sir, she snapped. He's dangerous. Emergency landing, please. A long pause, then, all right. Diverting. To St. Louis. Sit tight. Tara hung up, a grin splitting her face. She'd done it. The plane banked sharply, the cabin tilting as the captain adjusted course. Passengers gripped armrests, unease mixing with their anger. The intercom buzzed again. Folks, we're making an unscheduled stop in St. Louis due to a security issue. Apologies for the inconvenience. Groans erupted, but the hostility aimed at Isaiah didn't waver. Victor leaned across the aisle, his breath sour with whiskey. You're finished, pal, he sneered. Stealing in first class? Pathetic. Isaiah didn't reply, his fingers tracing the edge of his tray table, his mind racing. He'd thought the coffee was her last shot, but this was a masterstroke of malice. The descent was quick, the plane slicing through clouds, the St. Louis skyline looming below. Tara stood at the front, arms crossed, the wallet still in hand, her victory sealed. Isaiah's duffel sat untouched, the planted lie a ticking bomb. He could have fought back, demanded a search of her apron, exposed her game. But he didn't. Not yet. He'd learned patience in combat, waiting for the right moment to strike. This wasn't it. The wheels hit the tarmac with a screech, the cabin shuddering as the plane slowed. Passengers unbuckled, grumbling, but their eyes stayed on him. The door hissed open, and 3 St. Louis police officers stormed in, their boots pounding the carpet. They were burly, faces hard, badges flashing under the lights. The lead officer, a stocky man with a gray mustache, barked, "Isaiah Grant!" Isaiah stood, his 6-foot frame steady despite the hours of strain. "That's me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Hands behind your back," the officer ordered, cuffs already out. Isaiah complied, the metal clicking shut, a familiar bite against his wrists. The crowd cheered, a ragged, ugly sound. Victor clapped again, slow and deliberate. "Take him away," he shouted, grinning like a hyena. Tara stepped forward, handing the wallet to the officer. "Found it in his bag. He's a thief," she said, her tone righteous, her eyes gleaming. The officer nodded, pocketing it. "We'll sort it out downtown," he grunted, shoving Isaiah toward the exit. The other 2 flanked him, their grips tight, their faces blank. Isaiah moved with them, his head high, his steps measured. He'd been cleared once, thought he'd won, but Tara had flipped the board, turned a burn into a bust. The cabin watched him go, a mix of relief and disdain in their stares. As the officers dragged him down the jet bridge, Isaiah caught a glimpse of Jamal, the young man in the cap, slipping his phone out again. The red light blinked on, capturing the arrest, the wallet, Tara's gloating face. "This is going viral," Jamal muttered, uploading the clip as the doors closed behind Isaiah. The video spun into the night, a spark Tara couldn't snuff, but it was too late to stop the cuffs. Isaiah's victory had been a mirage, and now he was in chains. The stakes, soaring higher than the plane ever had. Isaiah Grant sat in a dimly lit holding cell at the St. Louis Airport police station, the clock on the wall ticking past midnight. His navy blazer hung over his shoulders, coffee-stained and rumpled, the Air Force pin a faint gleam against the shadows. His wrists bore red marks from the cuffs, now removed, and his trousers clung stiffly to his thighs, the burn still throbbing beneath. The cell smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a concrete box with a single bench where he rested, his 6-foot frame folded into a posture of quiet resolve. His hazel eyes stared at the barred window, the distant glow of runway lights flickering through. He'd been here before, not in cuffs, but in moments where the world turned against him for no reason but his skin. He'd survived Tara's slap, her coffee, her frame-up. He'd get through this too. The door clanged open, and a tired-looking officer stepped in, his badge reading Sergeant Monroe. He was black, mid-40s, with a shaved head and a frown that deepened as he spoke. "Mr. Grant, you're free to go," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "That wallet doesn't Hold up. Video evidence from a passenger shows the attendant planting it. Charges dropped. Isaiah nodded, standing slowly, his joints creaking from the hours of sitting. Appreciate it, he rumbled, his deep voice steady. Monroe hesitated, then added, watch yourself out there. This ain't over. Isaiah's eyes narrowed, catching the warning, but he said nothing. He'd won again, cleared his name, and that was enough for now. He stepped into the station's lobby, the air buzzing with late-night travelers and the clatter of rolling suitcases. Jamal, the young man who'd filmed it all, waited near a vending machine, his baseball cap tilted back, his brown eyes bright with relief. Man, I knew you didn't do it, he said, holding up his phone. Clip's got 1 million views already. People are pissed. Isaiah gave a small, grateful nod, his silver hair catching the fluorescent glow. Good work, son, he said, clapping Jamal's shoulder. The video had saved him, turned the tide. He felt the weight lift, the victory solidifying as he collected his duffel and headed for the gate. A new flight to Chicago awaited, and he'd boarded a free man. The replacement flight was quieter, the first-class cabin half empty under the soft hum of the engines. Isaiah settled into seat 3A, his fresh boarding pass crisp in his pocket, his blazer draped over the armrest. The new crew, a mix of young faces, moved with efficiency, no trace of Tara's venom. A flight attendant with a warm smile offered him water, and he accepted, the coolness soothing his throat. Passengers glanced his way, some whispering, others nodding with faint respect. The video had spread, painting him as the wronged hero, and the cabin felt lighter for it. He leaned back, the leather creaking, his chest loosening. He'd beaten her, beaten the system. Maybe this time he'd fly in peace. But peace was a mirage. Tara Hensley hadn't boarded this flight. She'd been grounded in St. Louis, fuming. In a break room, her uniform crumpled as she watched Jamal's video explode online. Her blonde ponytail hung loose, strands sticking to her sweaty neck, her blue eyes wild with rage. She'd lost the wallet gambit, lost her grip on Isaiah, and now the internet was tearing her apart. Comments called her a racist, a liar, a disgrace. She slammed her phone down, her breath ragged. This wasn't how it ended. She wouldn't let him win. She grabbed her personal cell and dialed a number she rarely used, her fingers trembling as it rang. Uncle Dale, she said when the line picked up, her voice tight. I need your help. On the other end, Sheriff Dale Hensley sat in his office in rural Missouri, a hulking man with a gray buzz cut and a face carved from granite. His sheriff's star gleamed on his chest, his desk littered with case files and a half-empty whiskey bottle. He leaned back, his chair groaning, his drawl thick with menace. What's going on, Tara? He asked, already sensing trouble. She spilled it all, the slap, the coffee, the wallet, the video, Isaiah's defiance. He's making me look bad, she hissed. Some old black guy thinking he's better than me. Dale's lips curled into a snarl. Ain't no one better than us, he growled. Where's he at now? Headed to Chicago, Tara said, pacing. New flight. He's free, Uncle Dale. I can't let that stand. Dale's eyes narrowed, a plan forming. He'd built his career on keeping order, on making sure folks like Isaiah knew their limits. This wasn't just Tara's fight. It was personal, now. I'll handle it, he said, hanging up. He grabbed his radio, barking orders to a deputy. Get me a package, something to plant. We're taking this bastard down. Within an hour, a baggie of white powder, cocaine, enough for a felony, was in his hands courtesy of a crooked evidence locker. Dale called a contact at the St. Louis airport, a baggage handler he'd strong-armed before. Flight to Chicago, first-class passenger, Isaiah Grant, he said, his voice low. Slip this in his bag before takeoff, no questions. The handler, a wiry man with shaky hands, nodded through the phone, pocketing the cash Dale wired. As Isaiah's new flight taxied to the runway, the handler pried open the duffel in the cargo hold, tucking the baggie deep inside, unseen beneath, a folded shirt. The trap was set, and Isaiah didn't suspect a thing. The plane climbed into the night, the Chicago skyline a distant promise. Isaiah sipped his water, the cabin lights dimming, his mind easing into the rhythm of flight. He'd flown missions harder than this, dodged missiles, landed on cracked runways. A spiteful flight attendant and a few hours in cuffs were nothing. He closed his eyes, the hum soothing, his victory tasting sweeter with every mile. The passengers around him slept or read, the tension of St. Louis a fading memory. He'd outsmarted her, outlasted her. This was his sky. Then the intercom crackled, shattering the calm. "This is Captain Reynolds. We've been alerted to a security threat." "Remain seated." Isaiah's eyes snapped open, his pulse spiking. The cabin stirred, heads turning, murmurs rising. Before he could process it, the door to the galley burst open, and 3 DEA agents stormed in. Black vests bulky, guns holstered, but hands ready. The lead agent, a lean woman with a buzz cut, barked, "Isaiah Grant, seat 3A." Isaiah raised, a hand, steady despite the dread coiling in his gut. "That's me," he said, his voice firm. "Stand up," she ordered, her tone icy. Isaiah rose, his height towering over her, his blazer slipping to the seat. The other 2 agents flanked him, one yanking his duffel from the bin. "We've got a tip," the woman said, her eyes hard. "Drugs in your bag." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he said, but the agent with the duffel was already unzipping it. He dug through, tossing out clothes, then froze, pulling out the baggie. White powder gleamed under the cabin lights, a felony staring Isaiah in the face. Gasps erupted, passengers recoiling. "That's not mine," Isaiah said, his voice rising, but the woman cut him off. "Hands behind your back." The cuffs clicked shut, colder and tighter than before, biting into the same red marks. The agent shoved him down the aisle, the cabin erupting in chaos. "Drug dealer!" a man in a tie shouted, his face red. "Get him out!" a woman in glasses echoed, clutching her kid. Isaiah's heart pounded, his mind racing. This wasn't Tara's style, not alone. Someone bigger was behind it. Someone with reach. He'd cleared the theft, thought he'd won, but this was a gut punch from the shadows, a frame-up he couldn't dodge mid-air. Back in St. Louis, Tara watched the plane's tracker on her phone, a grin splitting her face as it diverted again. She'd called Dale after the baggage handler confirmed the plant, and he'd tipped the DEA through a back channel, claiming an anonymous source. She leaned against the break room wall, her uniform crumpled, her rage sated. "You'll never win," she muttered, picturing Isaiah in cuffs again. The video might have saved him once, but this was airtight. She'd turned a slap into a felony, and he'd never see daylight. Isaiah stumbled as the agents pushed him into a holding area near the galley, the plane banking hard toward an unknown landing. His duffel sat open, the baggie a lie he couldn't disprove. He'd thought the system had bent toward justice in St. Louis, but now it snapped back, sharper, deadlier. Tara's hate had grown claws, and they were tearing through his life. He sat, his hands bound, his hazel eyes burning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Isaiah Grant stepped out of the Chicago airport holding cell at dawn, the sky a bruised purple beyond the barred windows. His navy blazer was creased, the coffee stain a faded badge of Tara's hate. His Air Force pin still pinned defiantly to the lapel. His wrists ached from the DEA cuffs, his silver hair mussed but his hazel eyes sharp with resolve. A lawyer, a wiry man named Carter in a cheap suit, had stormed in an hour ago, hired by Naomi Grant, Isaiah's wife, though Tara remained clueless about her. Carter waved Jamal's latest video, showing the duffel search like a sword, proving the cocaine was planted. "Frame job?" Carter had barked at the agents, his voice cutting through their excuses. "You've got nothing." The DEA grumbled, but the evidence held. They cut Isaiah loose. He walked through the terminal, the clatter of early travelers a dull roar in his ears. His duffel swung over his shoulder, lighter now, the baggie confiscated, but his dignity intact. Carter trailed him, muttering about lawsuits, but Isaiah tuned him out. He'd cleared his name twice, first the wallet, now the drugs, and the weight of victory settled in his chest. Jamal's clips had turned the tide, millions watching Tara's lies unravel online. He reached the gate for a new flight to Atlanta, his final leg home, and flashed his boarding pass. The attendant, a young woman with braided hair, smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, her voice a balm after Tara's venom. Isaiah nodded, stepping onto the jet bridge, his 6-foot frame steady. He'd won again, and this time, he'd fly free. The first-class cabin was sparse, a handful of passengers scattered across plush seats. Isaiah sank into 4A, the leather, cool against his stained trousers, his blazer draped over the armrest. The new crew moved with quiet efficiency, no hostility in their eyes. A flight attendant named Keisha, her name tag gleaming, offered him a blanket. "Rough night?" she asked, her tone gentle. "You could say that," Isaiah rumbled, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She nodded, leaving him be. Passengers glanced his way. Some recognized him from the viral chaos. Others just saw an old man with a story in his posture. A white woman, in a cashmere sweater, clapped softly as he settled in, whispering, "You're a fighter." Others joined, a ripple of applause, timid but real. Isaiah's chest swelled. He'd beaten Tara, beaten the system. The plane taxied, engines humming, and he let his eyes close, tasting peace. But Tara Hensley wasn't finished. She'd been reassigned to this flight after St. Louis, a last-minute swap by a supervisor who didn't care about her meltdown. She lurked in the galley, her blonde ponytail frayed, her uniform wrinkled, her blue eyes bloodshot from rage and sleeplessness. The videos had humiliated her. Comments called her a monster, her name trending with hashtags like "racist Tara." She'd slapped him, burned him, framed him, and still he sat there, applauded like some hero. Her hands shook as she poured drinks, her mind a furnace of hate. She wouldn't let him win. Not again. She needed something new, something to shatter him for good. The plane leveled off at 35,000 feet, the seatbelt sign blinking off. Tara grabbed a tray, her fingers curling around a plastic cup. She slipped into a storage nook, pulling a vial from her pocket. Sedatives she'd swiped from a first aid kit, crushed into powder. Her lips twisted into a smirk as she stirred it into Isaiah's water, the granules dissolving into a faint haze. She'd make him look unstable, dangerous, a raving mess no one could defend. The cabin would turn, the crew would panic, and his hero act would crumble. She smoothed her apron, her pulse racing, and strode out, tray in hand. She reached Isaiah's row, setting the spiked water on his tray table with a thud. "Hydrate," she said, her voice flat, her eyes daring him to recognize her. He looked up, his hazel gaze locking onto hers, a flicker of steel beneath his, calm. "Thanks," he said, lifting the cup, oblivious to the poison within. Tara turned away, her heart pounding, anticipation curling in her gut. He took a sip, then another, the sedative sliding down his throat. She retreated to the galley, watching from the curtain's edge, her breath shallow. This was it, her checkmate. Minutes ticked by, the cabin humming with quiet chatter. Isaiah sipped again, the water cool against the dryness of his throat. Then it hit, his vision blurred, the edges of the cabin warping like a funhouse mirror. His hands trembled, the cup slipping, splashing across his lap. A wave of dizziness crashed over him, his chest tightening, his breath hitching. He gripped the armrests, his knuckles whitening, a cold sweat breaking across his brow. His heart raced, erratic, too fast for 72 years. He tried to stand, to call out, but his legs buckled, and he collapsed back into the seat, convulsing, a low groan escaping. His lips. The cabin erupted. Keisha dropped her tray, cups clattering, and rushed over. Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted, her voice sharp with panic. Passengers gasped, heads snapping around. The woman in cashmere screamed, "He's dying!" A man in a polo shirt leapt up yelling, "Do something!" Tara stepped forward, her face a mask of fake shock. "He's dangerous!" she cried, pointing at Isaiah's thrashing form. "He's on something! Look at him!" Her words were a match to dry grass, igniting fear. Passengers recoiled, whispers turning to shouts. "Get him off!" a woman in glasses shrieked. "He's a threat!" a businessman echoed. Isaiah's body shook, his mind fogged but fighting. He'd flown through storms, survived crashes. This wasn't natural. His hazel eyes, half-lidded, caught Tara's smirk through the haze and a spark of clarity cut through. She'd done this. Poisoned him. His tongue felt thick, but he forced out a rasp. Check. The water. Keisha froze, her hands on his shoulders, then grabbed the cup, sniffing it. Her eyes widened. A faint chemical tang lingered. This isn't right, she muttered, spinning toward Tara. What did you do? Tara's mask slipped, her smirk faltering. He's delusional, she snapped, backing up. He's lying. But the damage was done. A passenger, a wiry man in a tracksuit, stood up, his voice booming. I'm a doctor. Let me see him. He pushed past Tara, kneeling beside Isaiah, checking his pulse. Sedatives, the doctor said, his tone grim. Someone dosed him. He rummaged in his bag, pulling a syringe, an antidote he carried, for emergencies. He jabbed it into Isaiah's arm, the needle biting through fabric. Hang on, man, he said, his hand steady. Isaiah's convulsions slowed, his breathing ragged but stabilizing. The cabin watched, breathless, as Isaiah slumped back, sweat-soaked, alive. Keisha glared at Tara, her fists clenched. You're done, she hissed, grabbing the intercom. Captain, we've got a poisoning in first class, suspects a crew member. Tara's face drained of color, her triumph shattering. Isaiah's eyes fluttered open, locking onto her, a promise in their depths. He'd survived her again, but this time, she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The doctor nodded, wiping his brow. He'll make it. But whoever did this, they wanted him gone. Isaiah's chest heaved, the fog lifting, his mind sharpening. He'd thought the drugs were the end, thought he'd won by boarding this flight. But Tara had turned a frame-up into attempted murder, and the cabin's cheers had flipped to chaos. He gripped the armrest, his voice a weak growl. She won't stop. The doctor frowned, glancing at Tara, who shrank against the galley wall, her eyes darting. She'd called for backup, her radio crackling with static, but the crew was on to her now. This wasn't over, not yet. All right, folks, what's your take? Did Tara go too far trying to break Isaiah with that sedative? Comment 1 if you think she's lost it completely. 2 if you believe she's still got a trick up her sleeve. If this kind of raw fight for justice keeps you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe for the next wild turn. Ever had someone push you to the edge like this? Tell us below. We're all ears. Now, here's the kicker. With Tara cornered and Isaiah barely alive, will the passengers finally turn on her? Or is something even darker waiting to strike? Isaiah Grant slumped in his first-class seat, the leather slick with his sweat, his navy blazer crumpled beside him. The Air Force pin glinted faintly, a lone beacon on his stained lapel as his chest heaved, the sedative's fog still clinging to his senses. His silver hair stuck to his forehead, his hazel eyes half open but burning with resolve. The doctor, a wiry man in a tracksuit, hovered nearby, wiping his hands on a napkin, the syringe discarded. You're lucky, he muttered, his voice rough with relief. That dose could have stopped your heart. Isaiah nodded weakly, his deep voice a rasp. Not my first close call. His thighs still ached from the coffee burn, his wrists raw from cuffs, but he was alive. He'd beaten Tara again. Keisha, the flight attendant who'd caught the chemical whiff, stood over Tara Hensley, her fists clenched, her braided hair swinging as she barked into the intercom. Captain Reynolds, Tara spiked his drink. She's suspended. Effective now. The captain's voice crackled back, terse. Copy that. Restrain her. We're diverting to Minneapolis. Tara shrank against the galley wall, her blonde ponytail frayed, her blue eyes wide with panic. Her uniform hung loose, her apron stained with spilled water, her smirk gone. The crew turned on her, passengers whispering, the tide shifting. Isaiah's chest loosened, a faint hope flickering. He'd survived her poison, exposed her, and now she was done. This flight might finally land in peace. The plane banked toward Minneapolis, the cabin lights dimming as the engines hummed a steady drone. Keisha zip-tied Tara's wrists, her movements sharp, her face a mask of disgust. You're a disgrace, she hissed, shoving Tara into a jump seat out of sight. Passengers settled, some nodding approval, others staring at Isaiah with newfound respect. The woman in cashmere leaned over, her voice soft. "You're tougher than they think." Isaiah gave a tired nod, his 6-foot frame sinking deeper into the seat. His hands rested on his lap, the red marks from cuffs a quiet testament to his ordeal. He'd won this round, publicly, decisively. Tara was finished, and he could breathe. But Victor Klein had other plans. The businessman in the gray suit sat 2 rows back, his gold watch ticking like a bomb, his dark hair slicked with gel. He'd watched Tara's fall with a scowl, his earlier smirks replaced by a simmering rage. Isaiah's victories, the wallet, the drugs, now this, gnawed at him. He'd egged Tara on, relished her attacks, but this applause? This hero worship for a black man he'd dismissed? It was too much. He leaned toward the man in the polo shirt beside him, a burly guy with a red face. "She's lying," Victor whispered, his voice a venomous thread. "He attacked her first, I saw it." The man frowned, his brow creasing. "What do you mean?" Victor's lips curled, his eyes darting to Isaiah. "Back in St. Louis before the wallet thing, he grabbed her arm, threatened her. She's just defending herself now." It was a lie, spun from thin air, but Victor's tone carried weight, his suit and watch lending him credibility. The man's eyes widened, doubt creeping in. "Why'd they let him go then?" he asked. Victor shrugged, casual but cutting. "System's soft. You know how it is. People like him get passes." The man nodded slowly, the seed planted, hate taking root. Victor stood, stretching, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Hey folks, you buying this?" He pointed at Isaiah, his finger jabbing the air. "This guy's dangerous. I saw him rough up the attendant earlier. She's the victim here." Heads turned, murmurs rippling. The woman in glasses clutched her kid, whispering, "Is that true?" The businessman in a tie frowned, leaning forward. "What did he do?" Victor seized the moment, his voice booming. "Grabbed her, yelled at her before all this. She spilled the coffee because she was scared. Now he's playing innocent." The lie spread, a spark igniting dry tinder. The cabin shifted, unease turning to anger. The man in polo stood, his fists balled. "He's a thug!" he shouted, glaring at Isaiah. The woman in cashmere hesitated, her applause fading, doubt clouding her eyes. The teenage girl pulled her, hood up, shrinking back. Isaiah's head snapped up, his haze clearing as the mood turned. "That's not what happened," he said, his deep voice firm. But the crowd wasn't listening. Victor smirked, fanning the flames. "He's lying. Look at him, acting all calm now. He's a threat." Passengers rose, a mob forming, their faces twisting with fear and rage. The man in polo grabbed a magazine, rolling it tight, a makeshift club. "We can't wait for landing," he yelled. "He'll hurt someone." A woman in a floral dress nodded, her voice shrill. "Lock him up!" They surged toward Isaiah, a wave of hate crashing over reason. Keisha spun around, shouting, "Sit down! He's the victim!" But her words drowned in the roar. The doctor stood, blocking the aisle. "Back off! He's clean!" he barked, but the mob shoved him aside, his tracksuit tangling as he stumbled. Isaiah stood, his 6-foot frame towering, his hands raised to calm them. "I didn't touch her," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his legs. The sedative still lingered, weakening him, but he wouldn't cower. The man in polo lunged, swinging the magazine at his head. Isaiah ducked, the paper grazing his ear, his reflexes sharp from decades of training. The woman in glasses screamed. "He's fighting back," fueling the chaos. Victor pointed, yelling, "See, he's violent." The lie took hold, a noose tightening around Isaiah's neck. They grabbed him, hands clawing at his blazer, tearing the fabric. The Air Force pin clattered to the floor, stomped underfoot. Isaiah stumbled, his knees buckling as they dragged him toward the rear bathroom, a tiny prison in the sky. "Lock him in," a man in a tie bellowed, his face flushed. They shoved him inside, the door slamming shut, the lock clicking with a final snap. Isaiah hit the wall, his shoulder jarring, the space tight and suffocating. Fists pounded the door, a rhythmic thud that echoed like war drums. "Stay in there, you animal!" a woman shrieked, her voice raw with hate. Inside, Isaiah braced against the sink, his breath ragged, his hazel eyes blazing. The mob's chants seeped through. Thug, threat. Words he'd heard in jungles, in towns, in nightmares. This wasn't Tara's doing, not directly, but her hate had lit the fuse, and Victor had poured the gas. The door shuddered, splinters cracking as fists hammered harder. His hands shook, the sedative's aftershocks warring with his adrenaline. He'd thought Tara's suspension was the end, thought he'd won by surviving her poison. But this? This was a lynch mob, a throwback to a history he'd fought to bury. Keisha pounded on the galley phone, her voice frantic. "Captain, we've got a riot. They've locked him in the bathroom." Reynolds cursed through the line. 5 minutes to Minneapolis. Hold them off." She turned, grabbing a fire extinguisher, ready to fight her way back. But the mob blocked the aisle, a wall, a fury. The doctor scrambled to his feet, shouting, "He's innocent." But a fist knocked him down, blood trickling from his lip. The plane descended, the engines whining, the cabin tilting as the mob raged. Victor slipped back to his seat, his smirk, returning his hands clean but his work done. He'd turned applause into anarchy, flipped Isaiah's victory into a trap. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a slim knife, a switchblade he'd carried for protection. As the mob distracted the crew, he slid it across the floor, nudging it into Isaiah's torn duffel, half open near the bathroom door. A final twist, a seed for the next blow. The plane jolted, wheels skimming the tarmac, but inside, the war was far from over. Isaiah pressed his back to the door, the pounding relentless, the splintered wood creaking under the assault. His chest heaved, his mind racing. He'd flown through hell, survived Tara's poison. But this mob, this was a beast he couldn't outmaneuver, not yet. The knife lay unseen, a silent threat in his bag, and the landing loomed, a promise of rescue or ruin. He'd thought he was safe, thought he'd beaten her, but the hate had grown claws and it wasn't letting go. The bathroom door shuddered under the mob's fists as the plane rolled to a stop on the Minneapolis tarmac, the engines winding down to a low whine. Isaiah Grant braced his 6-foot frame against the sink, his navy blazer torn at the shoulder, the coffee stain a grim patchwork across his trousers. His silver hair clung to his sweat-slick forehead, his hazel eyes narrowed with a mix of exhaustion and defiance. The Air Force pin lay crushed somewhere in the cabin, a casualty of the chaos. His chest heaved, the sedative's aftershocks warring with the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The pounding slowed, voices fading as the mob dispersed, the landing shifting their focus. He'd survived Tara's poison, the mob's rage, but his hands still shook, the tiny space a cage he couldn't escape. Not yet. The door burst open, and a flight marshal stormed in, a stocky woman with a buzz cut and a badge pinned to her vest. Her brown eyes scanned Isaiah, her hand resting on her holstered gun. "You Grant?" she barked, her voice sharp over the hum of the cabin. Isaiah nodded, steadying himself against the wall. "Yes, ma'am," he rumbled, his deep voice hoarse but firm. She grabbed his arm, pulling him out. "You're clear of the mob, but we've got a problem," she said, her grip tight as she led him back to the aisle. The passengers sat rigid, their faces a mix of fear and disdain, the earlier fury simmering into silence. Keisha stood nearby, her braids swinging, her extinguisher still in hand, her eyes blazing at the crowd. The marshal stopped at Isaiah's seat, where his torn duffel lay half open, kicked aside in the melee. She knelt, rummaging through it, her fingers brushing his spare shirt, his folded socks. Then she froze, pulling out a slim switchblade, its silver handle glinting under the cabin lights. "This yours?" she asked, holding it up, her tone hard. Isaiah's stomach dropped, his hazel eyes locking on the weapon. "No," he said, his voice steady despite the dread coiling in his gut. "Never seen it." The marshal's jaw tightened, her gaze flicking to the passengers. "Found it in your bag. You're armed, sir. That's a felony up here." The cabin erupted again, whispers turning to shouts. "He's got a knife!" the man in polo bellowed, leaping up, his red face flushed with triumph. Told you he's dangerous, the woman in glasses shrieked, clutching her kid tighter. Victor Klein leaned back in his seat, his gray suit pristine, his gold watch ticking silently. His smirk was subtle, hidden from the marshal, but Isaiah caught it, a flicker of victory in those cold eyes. He'd planted it, slipped it in during the chaos, and now the noose was tightening. Isaiah's hands clenched, his mind racing. He'd beaten the drugs, the mob, but this was a trap he hadn't seen coming. The marshal cuffed him, the metal biting into his wrists, a familiar sting that felt heavier this time. "You're under arrest," she said, her voice flat, professional. "Weapon on a plane. Doesn't matter what you say." Isaiah didn't resist, his 6-foot frame slumping slightly as she shoved him toward the galley. Keisha stepped forward, her voice rising. "That's not his. Someone set him up." The marshal waved her off. "Take it up with the judge," she grunted, pushing Isaiah into a holding area. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in his ears. The plane emptied, passengers filing out, their glares cutting through him as they passed the galley window. The man in a tie muttered, "Should have known," his voice dripping with disdain. The woman in cashmere looked away, her earlier support gone, doubt poisoning her eyes. Isaiah sat on a metal bench, his head high, his torn blazer draped over his lap. He'd thought Tara's suspension was the end, thought the mob was the worst of it. But Victor had turned a riot into a felony, and the knife was a blade at his throat. He'd survived combat, outlasted Tara's poison. But this system? It was a beast he couldn't fight alone. In Minneapolis, Tara Hensley watched from the gate, her zip-tied hands freed after a crew swap, her blonde ponytail loose, her uniform discarded for a hoodie. She'd been sidelined, but Victor's text lit up her phone. Knife in his bag. He's done. Her lips curled into a grin, her blue eyes gleaming with spite. She'd lost the flight, lost her grip, but Victor had picked up her torch, and now Isaiah was in cuffs again. She leaned against a pillar, sipping a soda, her pulse racing with triumph. She'd turned a slap into a war, and her ally had landed the blow she couldn't. Isaiah's lawyer, Carter, arrived at the airport police station an hour later. His cheap suit wrinkled, his briefcase battered. He stormed into the holding area, waving a bail slip. "Knife's a plant," he snapped at the desk sergeant, a pudgy man with a mustache. "No prints, no witnesses. He's clean." The sergeant shrugged, processing the paperwork, and Isaiah walked free, his wrists sore, his duffel returned, minus the blade. Carter clapped his shoulder. "Naomi's pissed," he said, grinning. "She's sending a private jet. You're out of this hellhole." Isaiah nodded, his chest loosening. He'd cleared another hurdle, thought he'd won, again. He followed Carter to a private hangar, the jet waiting, sleek and silver under the midday sun. He boarded, the cabin a stark contrast to the commercial chaos, wide seats, polished wood, a crew of 2 in crisp uniforms. "Mr. Grant, welcome," the pilot said, a young woman with a steady handshake. "Mrs. Grant's orders, straight to Atlanta, no stops." Isaiah sank into a seat, his torn blazer beside him, his stained trousers a reminder of the fight. The engines roared, the jet climbing fast, the Minneapolis skyline shrinking below. He sipped a water, no sedatives this time, his hazel eyes softening. Naomi's reach had saved him, pulled him from the fire. He'd fly home, safe at last. But Sheriff Dale Hensley wasn't letting go. In his Missouri office, his gray buzz cut gleamed under a flickering bulb, his sheriff's star pinned to his chest. Tara's call had woken a beast in him, and Isaiah's escapes, wallet, drugs, knife, fueled his rage. He'd seen the videos, heard the chatter, knew his niece was a pariah, but this wasn't just about her anymore. Isaiah was a symbol, a black man defying the order Dale had spent decades enforcing. He slammed his whiskey glass down, barking into his radio. "Get me his flight path. Now." A deputy patched him into a contact at air traffic control, a nervous man Dale had dirt on. "Private jet, Grant's aboard," the man stammered, feeding coordinates. Dale grinned, a predator's smile, and dialed a hacker he'd used before, a skinny kid with a laptop and no morals. "Scramble it," Dale ordered, sliding cash through a wire. "Send that jet to my airstrip, I've got boys waiting." The hacker cracked the navigation system, rerouting the jet mid-flight, the pilot none the wiser. Dale grabbed his rifle, calling his militia. 10 men in camo, armed to the teeth, itching for a fight. The jet banked suddenly, the cabin tilting, Isaiah's water splashing across his lap. "What the hell?" he muttered, gripping the armrests. The pilot's voice crackled over the speaker, tense. "Sir, navigation's off. We're heading south, rural Georgia." Isaiah's gut twisted, his hazel eyes sharpening. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had him in their sights. The jet descended fast, the landscape below a blur of trees and dirt, a makeshift airstrip carved into the wilderness. The wheels hit hard, the cabin shuddering, dust billowing outside. The door hissed open, and Dale's militia swarmed, rifles raised, faces smeared with grease paint, slurs spitting from their lips. "Get out, boy," one yelled, his voice a guttural snarl. Isaiah stood, his 6-foot frame steady, his torn blazer in hand. He stepped onto the tarmac, the heat thick, the air sour with hate. This wasn't Tara's doing, not Victor's. This was bigger, older, a war he'd fought in shadows. He'd thought the jet was his escape, thought he'd won by surviving Minneapolis, but the system had teeth, and they were closing in. The militia circled, guns cocked, their chants a wall of sound. Isaiah's hands rose, not in surrender, but in readiness. He'd flown through hell, beaten poison, outlasted a mob. This was a new battlefield, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. Dale watched from a truck, his grin wide, his rifle ready. Isaiah's victory had been a flicker, and now the darkness was back, hungrier than ever. Isaiah Grant stood on the cracked tarmac of a rural Georgia airstrip, the private jet's engine still ticking behind him as dust swirled in the humid afternoon air. His navy blazer hung torn over his arm, the coffee stain a dark scar across. His trousers, his silver hair matted with sweat. His hazel eyes burned with a soldier's focus, his 6-foot frame taut despite the exhaustion of a day that wouldn't end. The militia surrounded him. 10 men in camo, rifles leveled, their faces twisted with hate, slurs spitting from their mouths like venom. "Hands up, boy," one bellowed, his voice a guttural roar over the cicada's hum. Isaiah raised his hands slowly, not in surrender but in readiness, his Air Force training kicking in. He'd thought the jet was his lifeline, his victory over Tara and Victor sealed. Now, it was a trap, and the bloodlust in their eyes was a war he knew too well. Sheriff Dale Hensley leaned against his truck, a hulking figure in a khaki uniform, his gray buzz cut gleaming in the sun, his rifle cradled like a prize. His sheriff's star glinted, a mockery of law, his grin wide and feral. He'd rerouted the jet, turned Isaiah's escape into a kill zone, all for Tara's wounded pride and his own twisted order. "You've been dodging too long," Dale drawled, his voice thick with menace. "Time to pay up." The militia tightened their circle, boots crunching gravel, their chants a wall of sound. "Get him! End him!" Isaiah's chest heaved, his mind racing. He'd survived cuffs, poison, a mob, but this was raw, primal, a lynch mob with modern weapons. The jet's crew, 2 women, the pilot and co-pilot, stumbled out behind him, their crisp uniforms dirt-streaked, their hands raised. "Let him go!" the pilot shouted, her voice steady despite the guns. A militiaman, wiry with a scar across his cheek, swung his rifle butt, cracking her jaw. She crumpled, blood spilling onto the tarmac, a crimson stain against the dust. "My," co-pilot screamed, dropping to her knees, but a second man kicked her silent, his boot thudding into her ribs. Isaiah's jaw clenched, his hands twitching. He'd seen this before. Vietnam, back roads, places where hate wore no mask. He wouldn't let it take him now. He scanned the scene, his hazel eyes darting. 10 men, spread out, rifles sloppy in their grip. His duffel lay near the jet steps, useless, the knife gone but his instincts sharp. He'd evaded death in jungles, outsmarted traps in the sky. This was no different. He lunged left, diving behind the jet's landing gear as a shot rang out, the bullet pinging off metal. The militia roared, firing wildly, rounds chewing the tarmac, sparks flying. Isaiah rolled, his torn blazer snagging, his knees scraping. As he sprinted for the woods beyond the strip, a dense wall of pines and shadows. "Get him!" Dale yelled, his voice a thunderclap, his rifle raised. Isaiah crashed through the underbrush, branches snapping, his breath ragged but controlled. His thighs burned, the coffee scars throbbing, but his legs pumped, decades of discipline driving him. Shots echoed, bullets ripping bark, leaves raining down. He zigzagged, a tactic from his pilot days, making himself a ghost in the green. The militia charged after, their boots pounding, their curses a chorus of rage. He reached a gully, sliding down its muddy slope, his hands clawing dirt, his body low. His radio, clipped to his belt from the jet, crackled faintly. He grabbed it, twisting the dial, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Naomi, it's me. Ambush, rural Georgia. Send help." Static buzzed, then her voice cut through, sharp and fierce. "Isaiah, where are you?" Naomi Grant sat in her Atlanta office, her sleek desk a command center, her tailored suit a shield of power. Sky-high Airlines was hers, built from grit and vision, and now her husband was bleeding for it. "Airstrip," he rasped, ducking as a bullet whizzed overhead. "Militia, 10 armed, jets down." Naomi's breath caught, her dark eyes flashing. "Hold on. Choppers inbound. 15 minutes." She slammed the phone, barking orders to her security team, a crew of ex-military she kept on speed dial. "Get him out. Now." Isaiah crouched in the gully, the radio slipping back to his belt, his hazel eyes scanning the ridge. The militia, fanned out, their shadows looming, rifles glinting. He'd bought time, turned the trap into a chase. His chest swelled. He'd escaped, called for rescue, won a breath. Then the chopper's thrum pulsed in the distance, a black speck against the sky, Naomi's promise roaring closer. He grinned faintly, his hands steadying. 15 minutes became 5. The blades slicing air, a lifeline dropping into hell. He'd beaten Dale's ambush, turned the tables again. The chopper hovered, a rope ladder unfurling, dust swirling as it descended. Isaiah sprinted from the gully, his legs pumping, his torn blazer flapping. Bullets peppered the ground. The militia closing in, their shouts a feral howl. He grabbed the ladder, his hands raw, his 6-foot frame swinging as the chopper lifted. "Go!" he yelled into the radio, the pilot banking hard, the wood shrinking below. The militia fired, rounds pinging off the hull, but he was airborne, safe, the jet a smoldering dot behind him. His chest heaved, relief flooding in. Naomi's reach had snatched him from the jaws, and he'd won again. Then a crack split the air, a rifle shot sharper than the rest. Tara Hensley stood on the ridge, her hoodie soaked with sweat, her blonde hair wild, a stolen militia rifle in her hands. She'd tracked the jet's reroute, hitched a ride with Dale's men, her rage, a fire that wouldn't die. She'd lost the flight, lost her poison gambit, but this was her shot, literally. The bullet slammed into the chopper's tail rotor, metal shrieking as the craft lurched, spinning wildly. Isaiah gripped the ladder, his body slamming against the hull, his hazel eyes wide. The pilot cursed, fighting the stick, the ground rushing, up. The chopper crashed into a swamp, a mile from the airstrip, water exploding around it, reeds snapping under the wreckage. Isaiah hit the mud, the ladder tangling around his legs, his torn blazer sinking into the mire. The pilot and co-pilot scrambled free, coughing, their uniforms drenched but alive. Bullets splashed nearby, the militia charging through the trees, Tara at their head, her rifle raised. "Finish him," she screamed, her voice unhinged, her blue eyes blazing with madness. Isaiah rolled free, his hands clawing through the sludge, his breath a wet gasp. He'd escaped the airstrip, called for help, thought he'd won. Now he was bleeding, soaked and hunted again. He staggered to his feet, his 6-foot frame hunched, his silver hair plastered with muck. The chopper sank, bubbles gurgling, the tail rotor a twisted wreck. The militia closed in, their boots splashing, their rifles flashing in the dusk. Isaiah dove behind a cypress, his heart pounding, his mind sharp despite the crash. Tara's shot had flipped his victory into chaos. her hate a bullet that wouldn't miss twice. He'd survived her poison, the mob, the jet, but this swamp was a new battlefield, and the blood was already flowing. Hey folks, what's your call on this insanity? Does Tara deserve a medal for persistence or a cell for pure evil? Comment 1 if you're rooting for Isaiah to outsmart her again. 2 if you think she's finally got him cornered. If this relentless fight against hate keeps you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe for the next brutal twist. Ever faced a moment where victory turned to chaos in a heartbeat? Drop your tales below. We're all in this wild ride. Now, picture this. With the chopper down and Tara closing in, will Isaiah's military grit pull him through? Or is the swamp about to swallow his last stand? Isaiah Grant crouched behind a gnarled cypress in the Georgia swamp, the dusk sky bleeding orange through the canopy, the air thick with the stench of mud and rot. His navy blazer was a soaked rag tangled in the reeds, his trousers plastered. With slime, the coffee burned a dull pulse beneath the filth. His silver hair dripped, his hazel eyes glinted with a predator's focus, his 6-foot frame hunched but unbroken. The chopper's wreckage smoldered 50 feet back, half sunk, its twisted hull gurgling as water claimed it. Bullets splashed. Nearby, the militia's boots sloshing through the mire, their slurs a jagged chorus cutting the silence. "Where's he at?" one snarled, his rifle sweeping the shadows. Isaiah's chest heaved, his hands steady despite the crash, his air force instincts razor sharp. He'd escaped the airstrip, called for rescue, thought he'd won. Now he was prey, and the hunt was on. Tara Hensley led the pack, her hoodie drenched, her blonde hair a wild tangle, her stolen rifle gripped tight. Her blue eyes burned with a madness that had outgrown her uniform, her rage a wildfire fed by every loss. Isaiah's defiance, the videos, her suspension. She'd shot down his chopper, turned his lifeline into a coffin, and now she'd finish it. "Spread out," she screamed, her voice cracking, her boots sinking as she waved the militia forward. "He's here. I can feel it." The men obeyed, fanning through the swamp, their camo blending with the dusk, their rifles glinting like fangs. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was a vendetta, personal and primal, a hate she'd nursed since that first slap. Isaiah moved, silent as a ghost, his boots slipping in the muck, his hands clawing roots for balance. He'd evaded death in jungles, outrun ambushes in war zones. This was no different. His radio, waterlogged but alive, crackled faintly on his belt. He twisted the dial, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Naomi, chopper's down. Swamp, south of the strip. Militia's hunting me." Static hissed. Then her voice broke through, taut with fear. "Isaiah, hold on. Another bird's coming, 10 minutes." Naomi Grant's office in Atlanta was a war room now, her security team scrambling, her dark eyes locked on a map. "Get him out," she barked, her tailored suit creased from pacing. Isaiah's lifeline pulsed again, and he clung to it, his breath steadying. 10 minutes. He could make 10. He slid deeper into the swamp, reeds brushing his face, water lapping at his knees. The militia's shouts echoed closer now, their flashlights, slicing the gloom. "Over here," one yelled, spotting a broken branch from his dive. Isaiah ducked under a fallen log, his body low, his mind mapping the terrain. Cypress clusters, shallow pools, a maze he could use. His thighs screamed, the coffee burns raw under the wet fabric, but he pushed on, his 6-foot frame weaving, through the shadows. He'd survived Tara's poison, the mob, the crash. 10 minutes was nothing. The thrum of a second chopper pulsed faintly in the distance, Naomi's promise drawing near, his chest swelling with hope. The militia closed in, their boots splashing, their rifles firing blind. A bullet grazed a tree, bark exploding inches from Isaiah's head, splinters stinging his cheek. He dropped flat, mud coating his face, his hazel eyes scanning through the reeds. Tara stood 50 yards off, her rifle raised, her voice a banshee's wail. "You can't run forever!" she shouted, firing again, the round plowing into the water. The men flanked her, their slurs a drumbeat. "Get him! End it!" Their hate a mirror of hers, stripped to its bones. Isaiah crawled, his hands sinking, his breath a controlled hiss. He'd turned her trap into a chase, bought time, and the chopper was coming. He'd win again. Then the thrum grew louder, the sky darkening as the second chopper roared overhead, its spotlight cutting through the dusk, a black beast against the orange haze. Isaiah staggered up, waving his torn blazer, his voice raw. "Here!" The ladder dropped, swinging in the wind, salvation dangling above the mire. He sprinted, water splashing, his legs pumping despite the weight of mud and exhaustion. Bullets whizzed, the militia firing up, rounds pinging off the hull. He grabbed the ladder, his hands slick, his 6-foot frame hauling upward as the chopper lifted, the swamp shrinking below. "Go!" He rasped into the radio, the pilot banking sharp, the trees blurring into shadow. He dangled, the wind whipping his silver hair, his chest heaving with triumph. He'd evaded them, outsmarted them, turned a hunt into a rescue. The militia shrank to specks, their shots fading, Tara's scream a distant echo. He'd thought. The first chopper was his end, thought he'd won by climbing out. Now he was airborne, safe. Naomi's reach pulling him from the jaws once more. His hands tightened on the rungs, his hazel eyes softening. He'd beaten her again, turned her, bullet into a miss. The chopper climbed, the Atlanta skyline a faint promise ahead, and he let himself breathe. But Tara wasn't done. She stood in the swamp, her rifle smoking, her blue eyes wild with a fury that devoured reason. She'd lost him to the sky. Lost. Her shot, but she wouldn't lose the war. She dropped the rifle, grabbing a second from a militiaman, a scoped beast with a hair trigger. Her hands shook, her hoodie dripping, her voice a snarl. "He's not getting away." She aimed, the chopper a black dot in her crosshairs, her finger squeezing. The shot cracked, a thunderclap in the dusk, the bullet streaking upward, a hunter's last gasp. The round hit true, slamming into the chopper's engine, smoke billowing as the craft lurched, spinning wildly. Isaiah gripped the ladder, his body slamming against the hull, his hazel eyes wide with shock. The pilot cursed, fighting the controls, the swamp rushing up again. "Mayday," she shouted into her headset, the radio crackling with static. The chopper crashed, water exploding around it, reeds snapping as it skidded into the mire, 50 yards from the first wreck. Isaiah hit the mud, the ladder tangling his legs, his torn blazer sinking beside him. His chest burned, a rib cracking, blood trickling from his lip. The pilot and co-pilot scrambled free, coughing, their uniforms soaked, but alive. Bullets splashed, the militia charging again, Tara at their head, her rifle raised. "He's mine!" she screamed, her voice a jagged edge, her blue eyes locked. On Isaiah. He rolled free, his hands clawing sludge, his breath a wet gasp. He'd escaped the airstrip, the first crash, thought he'd won with the second chopper. Now he was down again, bleeding, hunted. Tara's hate a bullet that kept finding him. Victor Klein emerged from the trees, his gray suit mud-splattered, his gold watch ticking like a countdown. He'd hitched with Dale's men, his smirk a blade in the dusk. "Tara, you're a genius," he called, his voice oily with glee. "I'm Dale's son. Let me finish this." He drew a pistol, his dark hair slick with sweat, his eyes gleaming with a legacy of hate. Tara nodded, her rifle steady, her grin unhinged. "Do it," she hissed, stepping back. Victor advanced, his boots sinking, his pistol aimed at Isaiah's chest. "You've dodged too long, old man," he said, his finger tightening. Isaiah staggered up, his 6-foot frame swaying, his silver hair a muddy crown. Blood dripped from his mouth, his ribs stabbing with every breath, but his hazel eyes burned. He'd flown through hell, survived poison, mobs, crashes. This was just another fight. He dove behind a stump, the pistol shot ringing out, the bullet plowing mud inches from his head. He'd thought the second chopper was his salvation, thought he'd won by climbing out. Now Victor's gun and Tara's rifle were the new jaws, and the swamp was closing in. Isaiah Grant crouched behind a rotting stump in the Georgia swamp, the night sky a thick shroud pierced by the militia's flashlights, the air heavy with the reek of gunpowder and wet earth. His navy blazer was a sodden heap in the mud, his trousers a mess of coffee stains and slime, his silver hair plastered to his skull. His hazel eyes glinted with a soldier's fire, his 6-foot frame coiled despite the cracked rib stabbing his chest, blood crusting his lip from the chopper. Crash. Victor Klein stood 20 yards off, his gray suit splattered with muck, his gold watch ticking, his pistol aimed steady. "No more running, old man," Victor snarled, his voice a venomous thread, his dark hair slick with sweat. Tara Hensley loomed behind him, her hoodie dripping, her blonde hair wild, her stolen rifle raised, her blue eyes ablaze with unhinged triumph. Isaiah had escaped her bullets, her poison, her mobs, but now he was cornered, and the swamp was a grave waiting to claim him. Victor fired, the shot cracking through the dusk, the bullet slamming into the stump, splinters exploding over Isaiah's head. He ducked, his hands clawing mud, his breath a sharp hiss through the pain. The militia flanked them, their camo blending with the shadows, their rifles spitting rounds, water splashing as bullets missed. Isaiah's mind raced, his Air Force training a lifeline. Ambush tactics, close quarters, survival. He'd downed Victor once, thought he'd won with the chopper, but this was a new beast. And Victor was Dale's son, a legacy of hate with a trigger finger. Isaiah rolled left, his ribs screaming, and lunged, his 6-foot frame crashing into Victor's legs like a battering ram. Victor toppled, his pistol flying, his curse a choked yelp as he hit the mud. Isaiah straddled him, his fists hammering down, knuckles splitting on Victor's jaw, blood mixing with the mire. "Stay down," Isaiah growled, his deep voice a rumble of fury, his hazel eyes locked on Victor's stunned glare. The militia froze, rifles wavering, Tara screaming, "Shoot him!" But Isaiah moved fast, wrenching Victor's arm, snapping it with a crack that echoed over the swamp. Victor howled, his gold watch sinking as he writhed, his fight gone. Isaiah staggered up, his chest heaving, his hands slick with blood and mud. He'd flipped the fight, turned prey into predator, and won a breath. He grabbed Victor's pistol, a cold weight in his palm, and fired into the air, the shot a warning that scattered the militia back. "Enough!" he roared, his voice cutting through their slurs, his 6-foot frame towering despite the pain. His radio crackled, Naomi's voice breaking through static. "Isaiah, we've got you. Chopper's 2 minutes out." Naomi Grant's security team, ex-military in black gear, had launched from Atlanta, her orders a steel thread pulling him from the brink. Isaiah stumbled to a cypress, his breath ragged, his hazel eyes scanning the sky. The militia regrouped, Tara's rifle swinging, but the thrum of blades pulsed closer, a third chopper slicing the night, its spotlight blinding. The ladder dropped, swinging in the wind, and Isaiah grabbed it, his hands raw, his body screaming as he climbed. Bullets whizzed, the militia firing up, Tara's shots pinging off the hull. The chopper lifted, the swamp shrinking, Victor a broken heap below, his wails fading. Isaiah dangled, his silver hair whipping, his chest swelling with triumph. He'd ambushed Victor, turned a gunfight into a rout, thought he'd won by climbing out again. The pilot banked toward Atlanta, the skyline glowing, Naomi's voice a lifeline. "You're safe," she said, her tone fierce with relief. Isaiah gripped the rungs, his cracked rib a dull ache, his bloodied lip curling into a faint grin. He'd beaten them, again. But Sheriff Dale Hensley wasn't finished. In his Missouri office, his gray buzz cut gleamed under a flickering bulb. His khaki uniform soaked with sweat, his sheriff's star a twisted badge of hate. Victor's defeat, his own son broken in the swamp, lit a fire in his gut, a rage that dwarfed Tara's. He'd rerouted jets, armed militias, watched Isaiah slip every trap, and now this? He slammed his fist on the desk, whiskey spilling, his voice a growl. "He don't get to win." He grabbed his phone, dialing a deputy, a loyal dog with a bomb maker's hands. "Rig a truck," Dale ordered, his drawl thick with menace. "Atlanta runway. Blow it sky high." The deputy moved fast, a rusted pickup packed with fertilizer and fuel, a timer ticking in the cab. Dale drove it himself, his rifle beside him, his eyes wild as he roared toward Atlanta. 90 miles of highway blurring past. He'd lost Tara's flight, lost Victor's fight, but this was his endgame. Isaiah's jet wouldn't land, not alive. He reached the airport, bribing a guard with a wad of cash, the truck rolling onto the tarmac as Naomi's chopper approached, its lights a beacon in the night. Dale parked it dead center, the timer set for 3 minutes, and bolted, his grin a slash of triumph. "Burn him alive," he muttered, picturing the flames. The chopper descended, the Atlanta skyline sharp against the dark, the tarmac stretching. Below, Isaiah hung on the ladder, his torn trousers flapping, his silver hair catching the wind, his hazel eyes softening. He'd beaten Victor, escaped the swamp, thought he'd won with Naomi's rescue. The pilot's voice crackled, calm. "Landing in 1 minute, sir." The runway gleamed, a smooth ribbon promising rest, but then the truck erupted, a fireball blooming, orange and black swallowing the tarmac. The blast wave hit, the chopper lurching, glass shattering as the pilot screamed, "Pull up!" Isaiah slammed against the hull, his cracked ribs snapping fully, his breath a wet gasp, blood flooding his mouth. The chopper hovered, smoke choking the air, flames licking below, the runway a cratered ruin. The pilot fought the stick, banking hard, the craft trembling as shrapnel pinged off metal. Isaiah clung to the ladder, his hands slipping, his 6-foot frame dangling over the inferno. "Get us out," he rasped, his voice lost in the roar, his hazel eyes wide with shock. Tara's voice crackled through a stolen militia radio, patched to Dale, her laugh a jagged edge. "Burn him alive," she crowed, her hoodie dripping as she watched from the swamp, her blue eyes gleaming with victory. She'd shot him down once, and now Dale had struck harder, her hate a flame that wouldn't die. Naomi's security team landed nearby, a second chopper touching down a quarter-mile off, 4 men in black gear spilling out, rifles raised. "Hostiles on the tarmac!" one shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, his night vision scope sweeping the smoke. Dale's militia had followed, pickup trucks roaring in, their camo streaked with swamp mud, their rifles spitting rounds. Bullets zinged, the team returning fire, muzzle flashes lighting the dark. Isaiah's chopper hovered, the pilot cursing, "Can't land, too hot." Isaiah gripped the ladder, his cracked rib a knife in his side, his blood dripping into the flames below. He'd beaten the swamp, thought he'd won with the rescue. But this was a new hell, and the fire was closing in. The security team advanced, their boots pounding, their shots precise, driving Dale's men back. A militiaman fell, his rifle clattering, blood pooling in the ash. Another screamed, clutching his leg, his camo soaked red. Naomi's voice broke through the radio, frantic. "Isaiah, hold on, we're clearing it." Her office was a storm, her hands slamming the desk, her dark eyes locked on a live feed from the team's cams. Isaiah's chest burned, his hands slipping, his silver hair a muddy halo. He'd ambushed Victor, escaped Tara's bullet, thought he'd won with the chopper's lift. Now, the runway blazed, Dale's bomb a fist from the dark, and the fight wasn't over. The chopper swayed, smoke billowing, the pilot wrestling control, the flames a wall below. Isaiah's hazel eyes flicked to the team, their black gear a flicker of hope in the chaos. Bullets flew, the militia firing wild, their slurs a fading roar as Naomi's men pushed them back. He'd survived the swamp, turned a hunt into a stand. But this inferno was Tara's echo, Dale's wrath, a hate that wouldn't quit. His hands tightened, his cracked ribs screaming, his blood a steady drip. He'd won a breath, but the fire was hungry, and the night was far from done. Isaiah Grant dangled from the chopper's ladder above the blazing Atlanta tarmac, the night sky choked with smoke, the heat of Dale's bomb scorching his mud-caked boots. His navy blazer was lost to the swamp, his trousers a ruin of coffee stains and blood, his silver hair whipping in the rotor wash. His hazel eyes burned through the haze, his 6-foot frame swaying, a cracked rib stabbing his chest, blood dripping from his split lip. The runway glowed orange, a cratered hell where the truck had exploded, shrapnel glinting in the flames. Naomi's security team fought below, 4 men in black gear trading shots with Dale's militia, their rifles flashing, bullets zinging through the chaos. The chopper hovered, the pilot wrestling the stick, her voice a shout over the roar. "Can't land, too hot." Isaiah gripped the rungs, his hands raw, his breath a wet rasp. He'd beaten the swamp, thought he'd won with the rescue, but this inferno was a new beast, and it was closing in. The security team pushed forward, their boots crunching ash, their shots precise. A militiaman crumpled, his camo soaked red, his rifle skidding across the tarmac. Another screamed, clutching his arm, blood spurting as he fell. "Clear the line!" the team leader barked, his night vision scope sweeping the dark, his voice cutting through the gunfire. Dale's men faltered, their slurs drowned by the crack of rifles, their trucks retreating under the onslaught. The chopper dipped, the pilot finding a gap, the flames parting as she aimed for a scorched patch 50 yards off. Isaiah's chest heaved, his cracked rib a knife with every sway, but his hazel eyes locked on the ground. He'd survived Victor, Tara, the swamp. This was his shot. The chopper touched down, wheels skidding, the ladder tangling as Isaiah dropped, his boots hitting ash, his knees buckling from the impact. He staggered up, his 6-foot frame hunched, blood dripping into the soot, his silver hair a muddy crown. The security team flanked him, rifles raised, their black gear streaked with grime. "Move!" the leader shouted, shoving Isaiah toward cover. A burned-out baggage cart, its metal warped by the blast. Bullets whizzed, the militia regrouping, their truck circling back, headlights slicing the smoke. Isaiah crouched, his hands steadying, his cracked ribs screaming, but his Air Force grit held firm. He'd turned to crash into a stand, and he wasn't done. Tara Hensley burst from the shadows, her hoodie soaked with swamp muck, her blonde hair a wild tangle, her stolen rifle clutched tight. She'd hitched with Dale's men, her blue eyes blazing with a madness that had outgrown her flight attendant's badge. "You'll never belong," she screamed, her voice a jagged wail over the gunfire, her rifle swinging toward Isaiah. She fired, the shot cracking, the bullet grazing his shoulder, blood blooming through his shirt. He grunted, dropping lower, his hazel eyes locking on her, a promise in their depths. She'd slapped him, poisoned him, shot him down. But this was personal now, a hate stripped to its bones. Isaiah lunged, his 6-foot frame surging despite the pain, his hands clawing ash as he tackled Tara, the rifle flying from her grip. They hit the tarmac, her body thrashing, her nails raking his face, her screams a banshee's cry. "You're nothing!" she spat, her blue eyes wild, her fists pounding his chest. He pinned her, his cracked rib a fire in his side, his bloodied lip curling. "You're done," he growled, his deep voice a thunderclap, his hands wrenching her arms back. The security team closed in, zip ties snapping around her wrists, her body jerking as they hauled her up. She kicked, her hoodie tearing, her voice a broken howl. "I'll kill you!" Naomi Grant stepped from the second chopper, her tailored suit crisp despite the chaos, her dark eyes a storm of fury and love. Sky High Airlines was hers, and this tarmac was her kingdom, now a battlefield for her husband. She strode forward, her heels clicking, her security team parting as she reached Isaiah. "You're safe," she said, her voice steady, her hand disarming Tara with a swift yank, the rifle clattering to the ground. She turned to the team leader, her tone steel. "Secure her. Sheriff's next." Isaiah staggered up, his shoulder bleeding, his cracked rib of ice, but his hazel eyes softened at her sight. He'd beaten Tara, thought he'd won with her down. Dale Hensley roared onto the tarmac, his truck screeching, his gray buzz cut gleaming under the flames, his khaki uniform soaked with sweat. His rifle spat rounds, his militia rallying, their slurs a wall of sound. "He's mine!" Dale bellowed, his voice a guttural roar, his sheriff's star a twisted badge of hate. The security team fired back, bullets pinging off his truck, glass shattering as he ducked. He'd lost Victor, lost Tara, but this was his last stand, a war against Isaiah's defiance. Naomi's men dragged him from the cab, his rifle kicking, his fists swinging, blood streaming from a gash on his brow. They cuffed him, his curses fading as they pinned him to the ash. Isaiah leaned on Naomi, his 6-foot frame swaying, his silver hair dripping blood and sweat. He'd beaten them all, slap, poison, mob, swamp, bomb, and now they were down, Tara zip-tied, Dale in cuffs. He'd won finally the tarmac, his battlefield, his victory sealed in fire and blood. Medics rushed from Naomi's chopper, their bags clattering, their voices sharp. "Over here!" one shouted, kneeling beside a figure in the smoke. Naomi, pinned under a truck's wreckage, her suit torn, her leg twisted, blood pooling beneath her. Victor Klein had slipped free, a corrupt cop cutting his bonds in the chaos, and rammed her with a stolen vehicle, his gray suit singed, his gold watch ticking as he laughed. Isaiah spun, his hazel eyes wide, his cracked rib forgotten as he stumbled to her. "Naomi!" he roared, his deep voice breaking, his hands clawing at the metal pinning her. Victor stood over her, his pistol raised, his smirk ablaze in the dark. "You lose, old man," he crowed, his voice oily with glee, his finger tightening. Isaiah lunged, his 6-foot frame a battering ram, tackling Victor into the flames, the tarmac erupting as they hit. Victor screamed, his suit igniting, his gold watch melting as the fire swallowed him, his laughter turning to wails. Isaiah rolled, free, his shoulder bleeding, his hand scorched, his hazel eyes locked on Naomi. She gasped, her dark eyes fading, her hand clutching his. "You're... enough," she whispered, blood bubbling on her lips, her suit a crimson shroud. Medics swarmed, their hands frantic, but her grip slackened, her breath stopping, her body still. Isaiah's chest caved, a sob tearing from his throat, his silver hair falling over her face. He'd beaten them, thought he'd won with her beside him, but Victor's truck had flipped it all, her life the cost of his stand. Tara jerked in, her cuffs, her blue eyes darting, her grin faltering as she saw Naomi fall. She grabbed a dropped pistol, her zip ties frayed, her hands free in the chaos, aiming at Isaiah's back. Isaiah knelt over Naomi, his hands trembling, his cracked rib a dull ache beneath the grief. Tara's rifle had missed, her poison failed, but this shot was hers, a final twist of hate. She steadied the pistol, her hoodie dripping, her voice a hiss. "You'll never win." Her finger tightened, the barrel glinting in the firelight, her blue eyes a storm of triumph. Isaiah's hazel eyes flicked up, catching her shadow, his body tensing. He'd beaten Dale, turned Victor to ash, thought he'd won with Naomi's rescue. Now Tara's gun was the last claw, and the night was a heartbeat from breaking him. The security team spun, rifles raised, their shouts lost in the roar of flames and gunfire. Dale thrashed in his cuffs, his gray buzz cut matted with blood, his voice a fading snarl. The militia scattered, their trucks burning, their slurs silenced by Naomi's men. Isaiah's hands rested on her still form, his silver hair a curtain. Over her face, his cracked rib a whisper beneath the pain of loss. He'd fought a war, won a dozen battles, but this tarmac was a pyre, and Tara's shot was the final blow, poised to end it all. Isaiah Grant knelt on the smoldering Atlanta tarmac, the pre-dawn sky a bruised gray above the flickering flames, his hands cradling Naomi's still form. Her tailored suit was soaked with blood, her dark eyes glassy, her breath gone. The truck. Victor had rammed into her a twisted heap nearby. Isaiah's navy blazer was lost to the swamp, his trousers a ruin of coffee stains and gore, his silver hair matted with ash and sweat. His hazel eyes burned with grief, his 6-foot frame hunched over her, a cracked rib stabbing his chest, blood crusting his lip and shoulder. The security team fought around him, their black gear streaked with soot, rifles spitting rounds at the retreating militia. Tara Hensley stood 10 yards off, her hoodie dripping, her blonde hair wild, a stolen pistol trembling in her hands, aimed at Isaiah's back. Her blue eyes gleamed with a final unhinged triumph, her voice a hiss. "You'll never win." The tarmac was a battlefield, Dale's bomb a cratered scar, Victor's charred corpse smoldering in the flames, his gold watch melted into the ash. Dale thrashed in cuffs, his gray buzz cut matted with blood, his khaki uniform torn, his slurs a fading growl as Naomi's men pinned him. The militia's trucks burned, their drivers fleeing into the night, their hate silenced by the security team's precision. Isaiah's chest heaved, his cracked rib a dull ache beneath the weight of loss, his hands trembling on Naomi's face. He'd beaten them all. Slap, poison, mob, swamp, bomb. Thought he'd won with her beside him. Now, she was gone, and Tara's gun was the last claw, poised to rip his victory away. Tara's finger tightened, the pistol's barrel glinting, her grin a slash of madness. Isaiah's hazel eyes flicked up, catching her shadow in the firelight, his body tensing. He'd survived her every blow, turned her hate into his stand, but this shot was her endgame. Then a crack split the air, not her gun, but a rifle. A security guard, a wiry man with a scarred cheek, fired from the flank, the bullet slamming into Tara's wrist, the pistol flying as she screamed, blood spurting. She crumpled, clutching her arm, her blue eyes wide with shock, her triumph shattering. Isaiah spun, his 6-foot frame surging, his cracked rib forgotten as he tackled her, pinning her to the ash, his hands wrenching her good arm back. "It's over," he growled, his deep voice a thunderclap, his hazel eyes locking on hers. The security team swarmed, zip ties snapping around Tara's wrists, her body jerking as they hauled her up, her hoodie tearing, her screams a broken wail. "No, he's nothing," she spat, her blonde hair falling over her face, her blood pooling in the soot. Isaiah staggered back, his shoulder bleeding, his chest heaving, his silver hair a muddy crown. He'd beaten her, turned her final shot into a miss, saved himself in the chaos. Medics rushed to Naomi, their hands frantic, but her pulse was gone, her suit a crimson shroud. Isaiah's knees buckled, his cracked rib a knife in his side, his hazel eyes flooding as he sank beside her, his hands clutching hers, a sob tearing from his throat. Dale roared from his cuffs, his voice a guttural snarl, his gray buzz cut gleaming under the chopper's spotlight. "You'll pay, boy," he shouted, his khaki uniform soaked with sweat and blood, his sheriff's star a twisted lie. The security team dragged him to a van, his fists pounding metal, his fight fading as they slammed the door. Victor's ashes smoked nearby, his laughter silenced, his gray suit a charred ruin, his last blow, Naomi's death, a wound that cut deeper than any bullet. Isaiah's chest caved, his silver hair falling over Naomi's face, his cracked rib a whisper beneath the grief. He'd won the war, beaten them all, but the cost was her, and it was too much. Then a figure emerged from the smoke, a sky-high executive, a tall woman in a crisp blazer, her glasses glinting, her clipboard clutched tight. She'd landed with Naomi's team, her face pale but composed, her voice steady over the chaos. "Mr. Grant," she said, stepping close, her heels clicking on the ash. "Naomi left instructions, last will updated yesterday." Isaiah looked up, his hazel eyes blurred with tears, his cracked rib a dull throb, his hand still on Naomi's. "What?" he rasped, his deep voice breaking. She knelt, her clipboard trembling slightly, her words a hammer. "She named you owner. Sky High's yours. Effective immediately." The tarmac fell silent, the flames crackling, the militia's retreat a distant rumble, the security team pausing, rifles lowering. Isaiah's breath caught, his 6-foot frame stiffening, his silver hair lifting in the wind. Owner. Naomi's. Empire, her planes, her roots, her legacy was his, a crown forged in her blood. He'd beaten Tara, Dale, Victor. Thought he'd won by surviving, but this was a flip he couldn't fathom, a power thrust into his hands as she slipped away. His hazel eyes hardened, his cracked rib a badge of the fight, his bloodied, lip curling into a faint, fierce line. He'd risen from a slap to a throne, and the weight was staggering. Tara woke in cuffs, her wrist bandaged, her blonde hair matted with blood and ash, her blue eyes darting as the reality sank in. She'd slapped him, poisoned him, shot him down, hunted him, and now he owned the airline she'd served. Her world, her rules, her pride. She screamed, her voice a raw howl, her body thrashing against the restraints. "No, it's mine!" she cried, her hoodie a tattered shroud, her hate a fire snuffed by his rise. The security team dragged her to a van, her kicks futile, her blue eyes locking on Isaiah, a final glare of defeat. She'd lost everything, job, power, freedom, to the man she'd dismissed, and the irony was a blade in her gut. Isaiah rose, his 6-foot frame steady despite the pain, his silver hair catching the dawn's first light, his hazel eyes sweeping the tarmac. Medics covered Naomi, their heads bowed, her suit a silent testament to her sacrifice. He turned to the executive, his deep voice a rumble. "Get me a radio." She handed it over, her glasses fogging with the heat, her clipboard steady. Isaiah clicked it on, his breath a steel thread, his words cutting through the static to every sky high. "Flight in the air. This is Isaiah Grant, your new owner. Crew from Flight 237. Hensley, Klein's allies, you're fired. Mid-flight, you're grounded. The radio crackled, gasps echoing from planes nationwide. The prejudiced crew, those who'd smirked, nodded, enabled Tara, stunned as their wings were clipped. Isaiah's hazel eyes blazed, his cracked rib a badge of his war, his bloodied lip a seal on his command. He'd beaten them with fists, with grit, and now with power, turning a slap into a reckoning. The tarmac glowed, the flames dying. The militia's truck smoldering wrecks, Dale's cuffs a clank in the van, Tara's screams a fading echo. He'd won. Not just survival, but dominion. A black veteran rising from ash to rule the skies. The security team saluted, their rifles lowered, their black gear a wall around him, respect in their eyes. The executive stepped back, her clipboard, a silent witness, her voice soft. She knew you'd carry it. Isaiah's chest tightened, his silver hair lifting, his hazel eyes tracing Naomi's form one last time. He'd fought a gauntlet, slap, burn, cuffs, poison, mob, swamp, bomb, loss, and emerged not just alive, but king. The dawn broke, a thin gold line over the cratered tarmac, the smoke clearing, the war done. He'd beaten hate with every breath, and now the airline was his, a legacy forged in fire. Isaiah stood tall, his 6-foot frame a pillar in the chaos, his torn trousers a testament to the fight, his silver hair a crown of resilience. Tara's hate had lit the fuse, Dale's rage had fanned it, Victor's blow had nearly ended it, but Naomi's will had flipped it all. He'd thought victory was survival, thought he'd won by standing. Now he ruled, and the skies were his to command, a shocking flip that turned a slap into a throne. The tarmac quieted, the flames a whisper, the dawn a promise. And Isaiah Grant, veteran turned mogul, took his first breath as owner, the weight of justice his alone to bear. Isaiah Grant's journey is a raw testament to resilience against relentless racial injustice. From a single slap by Tara Hensley, sparked by baseless prejudice, to a war spanning cuffs, poison, mobs, and bombs, Isaiah faced a system rigged to crush him. The first lesson screams loud. Hate doesn't need evidence. It thrives on assumption. Tara saw an elderly black man in first class and decided he didn't belong, escalating her bias into violence without a shred of proof. Yet, Isaiah's refusal to break under her attacks teaches us that strength isn't loud. It's steady, forged in silence and grit. The story also exposes the ugly reach of systemic racism. Sheriff Dale Hensley and Victor Klein didn't just act Tara. They weaponized power, from planted drugs to militia ambushes, showing how hate festers in networks, not just individuals. But Isaiah's victories, outsmarting traps, surviving betrayals, prove that cunning and endurance can topple even the mightiest foes. Naomi's final act, handing him sky-high airlines, flips the script. Power earned through struggle outshines, power stolen through hate. The deepest cut? Sacrifice. Naomi's death underscores that justice often costs more than we expect, yet her legacy in Isaiah's hands reveals a truth. Triumph can rise from loss. This tale isn't just a fight. It's a mirror. It asks us to check our own assumptions, to stand firm when the world pushes back, to see worth beyond skin. So what's your takeaway? Have you ever faced a Tara, someone who judged you before you spoke? Comment below with a 1 if you fought bias and won, or a 2 if you're still battling. Hit like if Isaiah's grit fires you up. Subscribe for more tales of defiance and share to spread this lesson. Thanks for riding this wild journey with us. Here's to strength, justice, and skies where everyone belongs.